Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. This is the monthly edition for the month of June, and I am delighted to be with you. This is Tom Navolis, your host, and with what I sent out a week or so ago in regards to why we're only doing monthly shows, I do miss taking the time when I had it to do a weekly program. But it's important that I at least bring you something that has a lot of depth to it. This program is on our dead Constitution. It is dead by virtue. By virtue? No, it's dead by a dead virtue, dead morals, dead religion. Now, you're saying, Tom, what do you mean ours is a dead constitution by dead virtue, morals, and religion? So let me start with this for you. In his letter to the Massachusetts Militia dated 11 October 1798, John Adams ended this particular communication with more than just a common phrase that most improperly assume that Adams is claiming a Christian constitution. Here's what Adams had to say in there, and this is a little bit more of that full paragraph. He goes on, because we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion, avarice, ambition, and revenge, or gallantry, would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Now, most people only hear those last two sentences, but do not understand that there's a whole framework around this. I'm including a link to that at the blog post for this week's program, for this month's program, so that you can get the whole letter with my emphasis in that letter and the definitions of words that most people do not comprehend in our modern society. Even the simple words of avarice and ambition. What does that mean? What did it mean then compared to what it means now? We could spend the whole time on that alone, but I wanted to take you a little further here in view of this concept that our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. People often, again, misquote Madison, because Madison wrote, to suppose that any form of government will secure liberty or happiness without any virtue in the people is chimerical, imaginary. It's an imaginary idea. What I really wanted to drive home for you is a clear understanding that how words are commonly used in our present time necessarily do not add up or are assumptive in comparison as to their historical significance. And our culture is so different. And I'm going to put you onto some references here, some videos that I thought were fantastic, that talk about the dead Constitution, a book which I have not read, but I've read the reviews on it and listened on these different reviews in relationship to this particular book about our dead Constitution. But I will remind you that once again, and I'm going to hold it up for you, is John Stormer's book, None Dare Call It Treason. 25 years later, in particular, talks about those killing our Constitution. I've talked about it significantly as to the corruption of our pulpits, which allowed for the destruction of our culture, because what you have to even more clearly understand is that the definition of the terms that I'm using here and rounding out for you were defined by the culture in place at the time. And that culture just came out of the First Great Awakening for our revolution to have any effect. It was important to understand what this was all about. What did virtue mean? What did it mean for a religious people? And to the extent that I argue on Unitarianism, both John Adams and James Madison were intent on separating Christianity from the political sphere, whereas Sam Adams was not, nor was Patrick Henry. But another one that was for that separation at least wrote this. So what Madison said, Thomas Jefferson follows up with by writing, "No government can continue good but under the control of the people, and their minds are to be informed by education what is right, what is wrong, to be encouraged in the habits of virtue, and to be deterred from those of vice. These are the inculcations necessary to render a people a sure basis for the structure and order of government." Well, we know that Jefferson, having no idea of wanting to look at the Trinitarian gospel and definitely look at removing, as he did, the miraculous Christ, only to look at him as a moral being, without having a change of heart and mind by the living God, you end up with virtue and vice, but the human propensity is to vice, to sin, because we're sinners. So even inculcating these ideas of right and wrong, there may be a propensity towards right once it's pounded into somebody, and there may be some virtue there, but more often than not, one's sinful nature, especially when they get into power, overcomes all of that unless they're grounded in a faith and clear understanding of the sovereignty of the living Christ. So Patrick Henry kind of rounds it out with a vitiated, which is impure, state of morals, a corrupted public conscience is incompatible with freedom. Pretty much what I was just saying. So he was looking at it as an impure, a vitiated state of morals. Isn't that what we have right now? That is exactly what we have right now. I don't need to get into all the details of the immorality in our nation at this time and a corrupt public conscience. Oh, it's okay to, be on drugs and buy guns. It's okay to, connect up with the Chinese and make millions of dollars off of influence peddling and public policy determined based on how much money hits the checkbook. And it's okay to turn the FBI loose on citizens for what they believe constitutionally and biblically. It's okay to do that. Corrupt public conscience. It's not compatible with freedom. I know. You've been waiting. You've just been waiting to hear what Sam Adams had to say on this theme. Sam writes this. He writes, "Neither the wisest constitution nor the wisest laws will secure the liberty and happiness of a people whose manners are universally corrupted. He, therefore, is the truest friend of liberty of his country who tries most to promote its virtue." So when we consider just the basics of what are those manners, the mannerisms, the cultural perspective that is there, and then we tie it to virtue. Now, in my last blog post, I gave you the definition of virtue. It's there. I'm repeating it with all the other definitions for the letter that John Adams wrote. And we'll go through that just in a moment because I want you to hear some of the words. But it is important, and it is important to note this, that if we do not have a foundation, then everything else crumbles. Nothing can be built on a sloppy bunch of sand, on shifting sand. Oh, that's even biblical. I'll let you look up the reference. Now, let's go here to John Adams' letter. We're going to touch on this a little bit, and I want to read this to you. It's a very short letter, but I want to read it, but I'm going to emphasize these words. So he's writing to this Major General and Brigadier General on what their address was, what they did in Lexington on celebrating the activities of what happened in that place. And he goes on to say, is while our country remains untainted with the principles and manners which are now producing desolation in so many parts of the world, while she continues sincere and incapable of insidious and impious policy, we shall have the strongest reason to rejoice in the local destinations assigned us by Providence. Right there, I want to stop. And the words that you need to go look at the definitions for are insidious and impious policy. It's critical to understand. Okay, I'm going to give you a hint in these last 2 minutes as I look at this here with you, is that first off, we have to take and consider what is none other than untainted, and that is not rendered impure by admixture, not impregnated with foul matter, not sullied, not stained. That's first off. And then a principle. What is that? In general sense, the cause, the source, or origin of anything, that from which a thing proceeds. Very interesting. There's a number of definitions there, but when it comes out to it, it is a general truth, a law comprehending many subordinate truths as the principles of morality, of law and government. Then manners, we even go into that. And it goes into the whole idea of conduct and good conduct in a moral sense. Insidious, properly laying in wait. Hence, watching an opportunity to ensnare or entrap deceitful, sly, treacherous, used of persons, intended to entrap. Impious is irreverent towards the Supreme Being, wanting in veneration for God and his authority. Irreligious, profane, a scoffer at God and his authority. Come on back for the second segment as we pick up on this letter And we talk more when Sam Adams returns. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns in this monthly program here for June. And I want to continue reading here as we already looked at that what John Adams is talking about is what will keep this nation sound. You got to get rid of the ideas of insidiousness and impious policy. We have that all over in what we're seeing in this nation right now. Impious policy with all the perversions, the moral decay, all that we have spoken about many, many times before. That leads to the summation at the end of this is that the Constitution is only made for immoral and religious people. And we'll get into what that religious people is all about. Now, he goes on to say, we shall have the strongest reason to rejoice in the local destinations assigned to us by Providence. But should the people of America once become capable of that deep simulation towards one another and toward foreign nations, which assumes the language of justice and moderation while it is practicing iniquity and extravagance and displaying in the most captivating manner the charming pictures of candor, frankness, and sincerity, while it is rioting in rapine and insolence. Do you have any clue what any of those words were? Do you have any understanding of where we should have our joy? But yet, if the people of America once become capable of that deep simulation, now in this case, we're going to look at simulation real quick, and then we're going to look at some of the other words. Simulation is the act of manifesting simulation is the act of feigning to be that which is not. The assumption of a deceitful appearance of character. So there you have that. Well, we have a lot of that going on. Oh, yes, a boy. No, I'm a girl. No, I'm a girl, but I'm a boy. Oh, I'm this, I'm that. I'm not a human. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the fundamentals of how we even establish the idea of morality. What is rapine? Rapine, the act of plundering, the seizing and carrying away of things by force. Boy, do we have a lot of that going on right now. That's where we're at. Think about what happens in our Justice Department in so many ways at the federal level. Sometimes at the state, sometimes even local, but mostly in the destruction of taking. Wait a minute. It gets even down to everything that Brutus wrote in the Anti-Federalist letter of what was going to happen in your homes. We're going to take away your gas heaters. We're going to take away your gas stove. Oh, we're going to take away your gas cars. We're going to take away your means of transportation. We're going to take away your health care. We're going to take all of your money and forgive student loans for people that don't deserve any type of forgiveness of that nature. Well, let's continue. And insolence is pride or haughtiness manifested in a contemptuous and overbearing treatment of others. What? Insolence. We see that in the media. We see that all the time. We actually see it, as I have for an example for you, from the President of the United States and talking about we the people who are conservatives. Let me just flip over there real quick, if I may. And in that case, let's see, here it is that President Biden is taking and making comments in relationship to how he looked at this gun control insanity based on his son's being committed or being judged as a criminal. And he says here, if you want to think to take on government, if we get out of line, guess what? They need F-15s. They don't need a rifle. This is tyranny and despotism when the government is talking about being out of line, which it absolutely is, and saying that they will use full military force against the citizenry. Well, we know that to be true. Let's just consider what happened in January 6th. And then let's consider what happened to Peter Navarro, Mr. Bannon, for not wanting to give information to a trash committee, the Pelosi hitters, for the January 6th committee. And on top of that, on the forceful taking of people's lives and all that they have from their families, think of all the J6 people that are now in prison, waiting for trial or have been tried and committed to further times in prison. What about the grandmas for taking and even protesting against abortion clinics? When we look at the messed up moral positioning on even life and death of a human being, well, first off, the government doesn't care about human life. And those in power do not care about human life. All they care about is remaining in power. You know all that. But do you recognize what that means? Do you recognize what you need to do about it? Do you have the moral integrity to do something about it? Well, let's go back up here to what we have from John Adams. He's talking about once the American people become capable of that deep simulation toward one another in the first part and toward foreign nations, which we see a lot of, then we're seeing that the assumption of the language of justice and moderation, while it is practicing iniquity and extravagance. So that's what we're practicing here in this nation. Iniquity. And iniquity is violation of God's commandments, God's law, biblical truth, sinfulness at its highest levels, and extravagance. Sam Adams wrote a lot about that and what was happening in Massachusetts with the frivolity of many things, the wasting of time, the wasting of energy, the wasting of money, the wasting of resources, extravagance, wanting to be like Europe is what Sam was talking about. We have so much extravagance now, even for those who claim to be poor. And with all these illegals demanding more than the basics they're being provided, which are greater than what they ever had, the pressure for extravagance, the demand for it, is what leads us to destruction. And displays in the most captivating manner the charming pictures of candor, frankness, and sincerity, while it is rioting in rapine and insolence. This country will be the most miserable habitation in the world. Pretty much where we're at. When you think of the economy, you think of everything that is the violence that's going on. When you think of the dual aspects, even in the justice system, there's another article that you've probably seen out there already. Nothing new that I'm going to tell you on this one is that what was happening there around the White House. You have from bloody Biden head to code pink war criminal display, White House protest gets heated. And in that heated chance for freeing Palestine and all that was happening around the White House, even the attack on a police officer there, the security there, none of those people were arrested. None of them are being thrown in jail. In fact, they're resisting the police, and those that did resist the police were cheered on. The article's there. Or you've already seen it. That demonstration surrounding the White House, surrounding insurrection, surrounding. Actually, what happened on January 6th was only on one location at the Capitol. And by the way, now we know that Pelosi has admitted that she should have done something. It's on video. She's denying it, obviously. But we knew all the time that she rejected all of that. But you have here is that the demonstration was a coalition of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, and Code Pink, which are communist, and they were featured dressed as Biden, Antony Blinken, Netanyahu, and Israel's Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant. Wait a minute. How is it that these people got away with all of this virtual rioting and with the bloodied head mask of Joe Biden? That's a violation, a threat on the president by a Hamas and pro-Hamas agitator. Bottom line is, we do have that dual system of justice. And there's more there. You know that there's more there. So as we continue and we look at it, that a country that is rioting in rapine, which we have with the FBI in particular, and the deep state in particular, and their insolence, this country will be the most miserable place in the world. Because we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions, unbridled by morality and religion. If you have unbridled morality and no religion, then you end up with avarice, ambition, revenge, and false gallantry. And that would break the strongest chords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Kind of where we are. Exactly where we are. I'm going to get into more of the wheres and what fors and suggestions of other videos that I highly recommend that you watch. But the last portion of this in this last minute is our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. We don't have that any longer. It's dead. Virtue is dead. Morality is dead. What else? Religion, in so many ways, is dead, based on what we know about what was going on after that first great awakening in the formation of this nation. It was not a religious constitution. I argue that several times, and I will continue to do so as we look at the conspiracy in Philadelphia and more. So come on back for the last segment, because Samuel Adams has returned. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of the June edition of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they kind of got it right, because what they forgot to do, as Dr. Gary North points out in The Conspiracy in Philadelphia, is they forgot to mention the sovereign of the universe in their arguments as to why the Constitution of 87 would destroy federalism over time. Because the mechanisms, as I pointed out before, of the Constitutional Convention for the ratification of the Constitution violated the Articles of Confederation. To that point, I wanted to find, if I can find it here, because I have so many articles up for you and so many links that I want you to take a look at, is that, do you know that the Constitution is unconstitutional? You're going, what? Here's an article back all the way in 2012, and that when we look at what the understanding of this is, it comes down to that basic point that Dr. North puts in, well, above the basic point. Dr. North's basic point is that the Constitution, with Madison and George Washington and even with Thomas Jefferson, destroys the sovereignty of God and creates a new God, being the sovereigns of men. Now, when I read the quotes at the very beginning of the program, you see that Madison, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson never talk about the sovereignty of God. They talk about the people. The people. They don't talk about the states. They don't take and bring in that relationship of federalism whatsoever. They actually are speaking in a destructive manner to federalism. So when John Adams uses the term the Federalist, he misses the concept of the states being the primary sovereigns over the Constitution, and the people within that context then within their sovereign states. Instead, especially with the preamble of the Constitution, it puts the people over everything and pretty much establishes what the communists in America are now saying, is that we are a democratic constitutional nation, or a constitutional democracy is their preferred term, not a constitutional republic, because a republic would require the states to have a level of sovereignty. So when we look at that, and we look at this particular article, is that the Convention of 87 violated the Articles of Confederation. They set up the ratification process completely different than what the Articles of Confederation had established, in that all 13 colonies needed to take and ratify something instead of 9. See, that's key. Only 9 of the states had to ratify the Constitution of 87 to make it compulsive over all 13 and into perpetuity. Big problem. Huge, huge problem. So I'm going to leave that one a bit, because the reality is that the Constitution is really established then, and as the Anti-Federalists did right, has the potential, from their perspective, of what our reality is, that the courts would take over. The courts would create law. that the bureaucratic state would come into play and obviate all of our liberties. Despotism and tyranny, utilizing the police state, would be subversive to our individual and our state's liberties and sovereignty. So by taking and saying that the individual, the people, are the sovereigns, they established a quite different order than what was intended through the Articles of Confederation and what was intended through what God established in a republican form of government all the way back to Moses. Quite interesting in so many different ways. Now, more on the videos that I wanted to share with you in respect to this dead Constitution. I was watching, came about, what was it, 2 weeks ago now? I guess, something like that. That on the Wade Show, he brought up this, yes, the Constitution is dead. And there's a link to it there in the newsletter. And in that, he brings up a concept from a gentleman by the name of Orrin McIntyre, who wrote the book, The Total State, How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. And he talks about these different points on how a constitutional government can degrade and end up being tyrannical. And he uses our Constitution as a really good example. Excellent video. Go watch it. It substantiates in so many different ways what I've been saying for years. Well, I can't say years. Let's say that what I've really been hammering home most recently about the Constitution, but in relationship to years, decades, in relationship to Samuel Adams and the Anti-Federalists, they warned us of what could happen and is happening and has happened to our liberties, even with the Bill of Rights in place, is virtually useless right now, based on the moral, cultural aspect, morality, religion, dead. And when I say religion's dead, let me qualify that here in the last few minutes, but let's get to that here in the last few minutes. So anyway, go ahead, take a look at the Wade Show on that one. Then again, I'm going to point you to Doug Wilson's, and what he has here is the same thing. Is the Constitution as dead as that parrot? What does that mean? In both of these, one question comes up: why is it that our Constitution framework cannot be replicated anywhere else? Why can't that happen? In fact, I had looked at, and you know that I know Dr. Skousen's son-in-law, the gentleman who wrote a number of constitutional classes, as well as The Naked Communists and a number of different books. I had the privilege of going into his private library, and one of the former popes actually asked him to look at Central America and write our framework of constitutionalism for those countries. I saw the binders of the finished work. You want to know why they can't implement our type of republic anywhere else? Because it was established for a moral and religious people. And the problems in those nations have a cultural bent to them. The way ours was established was based on the fact In reality, as I mentioned earlier in the program, we came out of that great awakening. We came out of a reformation of the churches, of the pulpits, in such a way that even Benjamin Franklin said in Philadelphia, the people were singing psalms on the streets instead of rap and whatever other trash stuff is out there now that they want to call music. Psalms were sung on the streets by the people. We don't have that. The culture makes a difference. And when you destroy the culture, as we have been allowing, and this is where the church is dead, the church of the living God has taken and diminished his sovereignty to be equal to or less than the state. And in doing so, we have taken and gone from that culture that was totally, well, not totally, 80, 90% fundamentally, biblically based, to now, if we have 3-5%, oh, that's right. Here, oh, it was off screen. Here it is, my left hand. What we have now is the perversion, the immorality. What we have is everything that John Adams was talking about in this letter to these generals of the people, where we're insidious, no manners, impious policies, where we are simulation, we're fake to one another, we're fake to other nations. Immoral, absolutely immoral. Justice is perverted. We're full of iniquity and extravagance. But we display these really charming pictures of candor, and yet we are what? Rioting in rapine and insolence. Oh, we are now one of the most miserable countries in the world. What has to happen? How do you change it? I'll be honest. There's only one way to get away from all of this avarice, ambitions. What? Revenge. We have to take and look at what does it require to move away from these unbridled passions, these human passions. It's only one thing. Looking again to the sovereign of the universe. You know, government was established in this nation in a constitution was that you have to be self-governing first. We've made, even many evangelicals have made government God by taking and stepping away from their responsibilities of governing well. I've talked about that a lot. We can go through all and look at all the mechanics and agencies and different things to point our fingers at. I mean, John Stormer, this is, quite a work that has all of that there. You can listen to Steve Bannon and he'll point you to the, the communist regimes that we have, the deep state and all of that. But what it comes down to is, where are you in relationship with the sovereignty of Jesus Christ in your life? And how do you live it extensively, as I've said before, many times before? How do you live that relationship with God in every aspect of your life? In how you work, how you live it in work, how you live it in your family, how you live it with yourself. How do you implement that even in government? If you're not doing that, then you're part of the dead religion and the immoral. And you deserve exactly what we have, is rioting in rapine and insolence, taking everything you have until there is no more. Come on back next month. Sam Adams returns.